Okay, so let me just share the slides. This is going to be recorded. I'm going to turn on my camera as well. Hi, folks. Also, wait, I should probably be removing this background because I am no longer teaching my class. Uh, this is much cooler. Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Imran Ilmam. I am going to be doing the media workshop today. So the reason I chose media as a point of doing the workshop is mostly because of the fact that well, media in general is something that I have a lot of experience with outside of debating because of the fact that I've engaged with media most of my life in some capacity in a professional level. So I've done a whole host of music production back when I was a teenager. Um, I play a lot of music. I do instruments, but also I think in most importantly that becomes relevant for this workshop is the fact that I have studied media in some capacity in tertiary education for the past 3 years of my life. So my pre-graduate and then my current bachelor's degree is in media studies in some capacity. Currently, I'm taking communications. And before I dropped out of Sunway, I was doing a music degree. So a lot of this is something which I am quite experienced with. So yeah, basically that is who I am outside of debating, and that's going to become very important in this lecture. Because what's going to be something I do in this lecture quite heavily is no, Abdul, I'm not going to, is that this is going to be a lot of spec dumping. So a lot of matter spec. So this is essentially a content lecture by the nature of it. It is going to be a content lecture where a lot of it is essentially me going to be matter dumping you about stuff that is important that you will most likely take in media debates. And all of this is something that can also be perceived as stock arguments. Well, I wouldn't call them arguments, but just stuff you should know that will help you create arguments. So think of this as kind of like a basic content lecture, right? So how is this workshop going to be like? I would highly suggest you guys take notes because a lot of the actual juicy stuff that I say is something that I'm going to say. What is going to be presented in the slides which I present, obviously, of course, you can refer to them, but I would highly encourage that you guys listen because a lot of the stuff, what I'm saying of extrapolating how you can take the stuff that I'm teaching here into actual debates, uh, are not something which I posted in the slide specifically. So I'm going to give a lot of examples of typical motions that come out and what I have seen in trends of motions, even the motions I've created, motions that other caps have created that I've seen in majors. But a lot of this content you can differ from the slides. I just think that it's far more productive for you if you just like listen to what I have to say and keep in mind of that. I'll also speak slow so that you guys will be able to follow through. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the types of media. Uh, Essentially speaking, you have mainly different types of traditional media that will often be present in some form of relevant debate nowadays. You'll see newspapers, books and magazines, cassette tapes that essentially make up music production before the streaming revolution. You have cable TV and news, which is essentially what came before the streaming revolution of movies and TVs. Physical advertising, whether it be billboards, also in magazines, TV ads, arts, painting, statues, blah, blah, blah. So, why do I bring up these traditional media forms? Even if we have gone through very like a reasonable digitalization, a lot of these media forms are still quite relevant nowadays. You'll always see a newspaper being sold in convenience stores, and bookstores have not decreased in any way form. In fact, they have managed to stay the same. So, you still managed to be you can still be an author quite well and just publish a physical book. I would say that some of these have definitely fallen out of favor. Cassette tapes, CDs, and DVDs. We all use Spotify. We all use YouTube. Even if you don't, even if you can't afford it, you can download music as easily and just play it in your phone. It's so easy nowadays. Cable TV and news. People just learn how to pirate stuff, and people just learn how to do streaming, and you could just watch things on YouTube, etc., and things like that. Physical advertising is still relevant, quite heavily relevant, because seeing a big billboard is something that will still see it in the day to day. TV advertisements, well, it's not technically digital, but it's part of cable TV. There's also a whole host of other physical advertising that you'll often see in your day to day, whether it be the average posters, etc., and things like that. Finally, art. Art on its own is a completely different motion. Sorry, it's a completely different workshop. So bringing this up is sort of the point of this is to just suggest that firstly, traditional media has not fallen out of favor. So there's still a huge degree of influence it has. It's just that to some degree it is inaccessible, even though people can see it. It's just that the creation of this, you often need to spend a lot of money, and you need to be part of a you need to be part of a media platform company, etc., and things like that. Um, but they do have some degree of influence that are pretty important. So a lot of this workshop isn't going to focus too much on traditional media, but rather the transition from traditional media to digital media and how that has influenced our society and our lives as we know it, and how you can kind of figure that out into debates. So digital media, three things. Obviously, as social media platforms, there are different kinds of social media platforms that are dependent on how they are mostly used. Connective platforms by nature. I know I said Facebook, but Facebook is both a connective and expressive platform. So connective platforms are just platforms where you talk to people. Snapchat, Instagram, Messenger. Um, to some degree, that yeah. Then you have expressive platforms. So Instagram, TikTok, where a whole host of it is about creative expression. But later we'll explain that creative expression often translates to other things, which are not just inherently creative, but also education. Then you have digital entertainment mediums, music streaming like Spotify and YouTube. You have video streaming, so not not film and TV show, but free video streaming. So obviously YouTube is a good example of that, and that's something that's quite revolutionary, and we'll be talking about that. And of course, video games are actually part of this medium as well. And video games are art in some degree. They will also be relevant in this workshop. Some other exciting stuff, though we won't talk about it too much. Virtual reality, not really a big deal nowadays because it's expensive. AI, very, very big. We'll talk about that later. AI is a huge part of what you will notice and see in digital media debates because the rise of AI art, the rise of AI generated content, ChatGPT is something you should definitely take a note of in terms of how you see digital media. Why is knowing these types of media important? Obviously, it boils down to context and the kind of motion that will happen. But of course, different kinds of media often disseminate and give information in various different ways. So, connective social media platforms, which allowed you to like talk to other people and post content and connect with other people to some degree because of the accessibility of it, because of the expression, the nature of the algorithm and the nature of the internet, because the fact that it is naturally not very like how do I say this? Um, there's a the censorship in this is not something that is present, obviously. It's very, very free expression with some guidelines. This meant that the capacity to express yourself in digital social media platforms has never been more easy. And yes, there are different traditional forms of media, but because of the democratization of production, in terms of you can make a YouTube video as easily, this is going to be a workshop that will be posted on YouTube. Back then, it wasn't as easy, right? Like back then, for example, let's just take an analogy. Debating workshops, pre-YouTube, impossible to access. You had to go to a physical workshop that often had limitations on your logistical capacity to even be able to learn how to debate. And more often than not, it was constrained towards the university you were in, the tournaments you get access, etc. Nowadays, look at you right here. You could access this workshop right here, right now. But also the kinds of different kinds of content, right? Music and streaming revolutionized the way that you could make music, you could listen to music, but also how you could produce music. It changed the way that the music industry operated. Back then, it was quite monopolistic. You had like these three big labels that controlled everything. And now they don't have that control because they cannot control every single musician ever. Same thing with YouTube and the creation of YouTube channels, which allowed a new culture of celebrity, which we'll talk about later. And all of these factors, like like the lack of censorship and the nature of globalization, a lot of all these things to blow up. Of course, there's some caveats and things in the way. One of it is the nature of corporations, and they're just businesses and to some extent political influence and the nature of how big actors play into this. So I think the most obvious initial thing here is that big businessmen are very, very powerful and they can shape digital platforms and digital media and shape trends in some variety of ways. It is often celebrities who are like the ones who are like making trends, etc. Maybe sometimes algorithms create trends to some capacity, but often people will follow them. And of course, the nature of social media platforms is that they are controlled by an external actor, and they are created in a way where they do want to influence people to profit maximize to see them. So algorithms, advertisers, data, selling your data is often quite a huge part here. Agendas, political agendas, ideological agendas, extent of echo chambers is something to keep in mind. How do you use this knowledge in debating? The way you want to use this in debating, especially when it comes to uh, reacting to things like digital platforms, is to understand how the how is it that these digital social media platforms were able to be used for every single average Joe in the world and allowed them to use it in some way. But also, it's also about how these things are controlled and how there poses a sort of existential question of the nature of every single digital footprint we have is something that is seen and heard. Our data is probably being sold right now. You often don't really have control and you don't often consent to this in some capacity. And of course, you have the classic echo chambers argument and the nature of algorithms feeding off echo chambers and not really wanting this, etc., and things like that. We'll go over a lot of the impacts a bit later, but this is something that's crucial to know in terms of the prologue of all of this. Let's mostly cover social media. I think a lot of the content in this lecture is going to be very, very heavily talking about the good and bad of social media as general and how you can, because social media is going to be used in a lot of debates. I guarantee you that, even outside of media debates, social movement, big part, uses social media quite heavily. Um, art movements, obviously, art and social media quite well entwined. Um, hypotheticals, etc. A lot of motions to use social media. You can run a lot of social media arguments when the time is right. Someone is unmuted. Please mute yourself. Why is social media really important? So a lot of it relates to things like connectivity, but then there are also dark. So the first thing we'll talk about in terms of why social media is important is just the nature of connectivity, and I think this is a very, very important thing that a lot of people need to be aware of. Um, someone is writing. Please don't annotate on the workshop. Like I should be the only one who can write things on a workshop, so please stop that. Sornali Akhtar, stop annotating. Thank you so much. Cool. So connectivity. Why is this important? Obviously, because humans are social creatures, we have the natural need to want to connect with others, but sometimes our capacity to connect with other people can be limited. Maybe in real world you are bullied, or maybe you just don't know how to talk to people. The ease of talking with anyone online, the ease with connecting with others, like all of you guys right now, let's just use another analogy. I would have not been able to give this workshop to you and kind of connect to you in some capacity without Symposium, without WhatsApp as a platform, without social media and extension communication media. So this is important because it allows us to connect with people in different countries and by extension create communities without needing to without the harm of being held back being held back by where you live there at that moment. And why is this important? Minorities, obviously. Sometimes minorities want to feel safe, they form communities, and they form that. This also forms a lot of the values and the belief systems that you have. So, for example, um, your community, the communities that you join on online, like Reddit, like Discord servers, like WhatsApp groups, right? And all of these things allow you to shape who you are as a person vis-a-vis the social connectivity, but also in terms of understanding and learning from other people, being able to understand other people's culture and way of life. So maybe you can create an argument of how that generates empathy in some degree, but also gives people safety from the harms of life. And of course, you have the catharsis of expression, being able to show to other people some degree of who you are as a person without feeling scared, etc. But there are, of course, dark sides to connectivity. Firstly, is of course grooming, unfortunately. Secondly, is of course radicalization and influence, which plays a huge part. If you join bad communities, you often will get bad ideas and bad influence. And that has an extension in terms of how horrible things in the real world are committed. So possibly so I think the most pertinent and obvious one are the January 6th riots in the United States during the 2020 post 2020 election, where a group of radical Trump supporters were able to band together and kind of rile up radical ideas vis-a-vis online communities and begin things like that. But also, amongst other things, unfortunately, a lot of things like school shootings in the United States and just terrorist attacks have grown larger and have grown easier to sort of um, flow under the radar, but also kind of increase people and recruitment because of internet. You have things like the rise of the dark web, the rise of the deep web, which allowed harmful connections, to call it that way, where you literally could call a hit on other people if you knew how to search in the internet. Then, of course, you have echo chambers. This is something that we already know. Echo chambers, even though they are somewhat symmetric, had a higher extent of harm when it came to connectivity in social media. So, for example, how your algorithm looks like and who you engage with. If you have mostly right-wing content, you're going to look at Andrew Tate podcast highlights. You're going to look at Jordan Peterson content highlights. You can look at Trump and fucking Trump edits that literally glorify what he says, and a lot of these very mecha- harmful mechanisms of like influencing you to do bad things. Possibly it could be the rise of conservative content that even if the world is going more liberal now, you have anti-liberal content with its own little shapes and influences and demographics within social media. That's pretty important to note. So there's a good and evil to connectivity. Let's now bring up digital work and opportunities. And I think a lot of people forget about this. This is like a very massive impact when it comes to media as like a platform that I have never really seen people talk about. Like this could be an argument in so many motions. But essentially speaking, the rise of digital work and opportunities is a massive thing that came out of the rise of media, specifically digital media. In the sense where it allowed every single average Joe to monetize some skill in some capacity and promote that skill or sell a service online without needing to rely on traditional training. So, for example, journalism had to be done in a way where had to join a company, you had to join like a newspaper company, or you had to get a degree. You couldn't just write something and have it thrown out because you had to pay for marketing, you had to pay for distribution, you had to pay publisher and things like that. That's not something everyone could do. It was something only privileged people could do. But now, another example, literally Debate Symposium is like it's like one amazing example of how the rise of the digital platform allowed a capacity for anyone to just create initiatives and communities out of those initiatives. So things like online spar groups, things like Discord servers, things like online tournaments, this very workshop and different workshop series is in itself a good consequence of digital media. And people often forget that communities are not just communities where people talk to each other. Communities are places where people create things, market those things, create communities and organizations extension to then sell things and distribute things and create content. So aside from just the debating example, it is the rise of things like YouTube channels, educational YouTube channels. A lot of the ways that I learned things as a debater, a lot of the ways that I kind of matter what's the word for it? Matter loaded as a debater was through YouTube. Watching YouTube content that historically was behind a paywall that I had to pay for to even get a physical copy of it. Now I can just pirate a book or pirate research articles that I could read to understand more about these things. And people don't realize just how crazy it is that the accessibility of everything in the internet is something you can access, yet people don't create these arguments in debates. Maybe some do. Maybe there's just some media motions in which this is just not something that's possible. But I would argue that this is something that's pretty impressive. The democratization of expression and the democratization of um like education meant that you could monetize yourself in some capacity. You could create a YouTube channel, you create a TikTok account, eventually become an influencer, Spotify for a musician, and the rise of creation of independent news outlets, citizen journalism that use YouTube, that use TikTok, the rise of influencers, where you could basically become a celebrity without coming out of nowhere. And this is something that's also important for minorities, right? I will bring up minorities a lot, but it's very important because obviously traditional forms of media historically did not get much incentive to cover things like minority stories and cover things that were not covered before. But with the rise of the internet and just the way you could democratize things, it was just so easy for anyone, even from rural spaces, because all you needed to do was an internet and a device, and you could do these things, right? So, by extension, all of this is quite important because it's not just the fact that expression is good, but expression is tangible in the ways that it acts as mediums for you to not only communicate to a wide audience, but also monetize whatever form of service you wanted to give that historically wasn't available back then. And there are many kinds of services here, as simple as just, you know, organizing a tournament, but also as simple as just making a YouTube video, as simple as just going on going and selling your art online. This is something that's crazily big and something that you guys should take note of. And of course, next with the rise of freelance work, man, also big. People don't realize that with the connectivity of internet, it is so very easy to find work opportunities that are inherently informal, where you don't actually have to get employed in a company and work that specific role in a company to get money. You have things like Fiverr, which is the biggest freelance platform in the world. Things like LinkedIn, where you were able to connect with others. Even Instagram, TikTok, where you could set up online shops to sell very small things that historically were harder to sell back then because you need to have a physical store and not everyone can see the physical store. But now you have the extension of the digital economy, the digital economy and the e-commerce, right? It's quite big. Anyone can sell anything. You can just ship it out, pay some account, but all of it comes down to just the fact that you can make whatever you wanted to create seen quite easily. So that is sort of what happened as the rise of this gig economy, the rise of like e-commerce. But also it's the fact that you could work for remote and foreign companies without necessarily having to go out of your house to do it. So, for example, a lot of coaches, debate coaches, don't even step foot in the country of the company they work for. They work online. Like I work for a company in Vietnam that I probably would have never been able to if it wasn't for this like social media. And the reason I say social media is because by extension, social media doesn't just extend to what you typically think as social media. It also extends to like YouTube and to broader extent internet because social in its nature means connecting, means you could connect with not just other people but other organizations, other institutions. Google gives you the capacity to just connect with these in some way. And another thing that's quite important, a lot of people don't realize, and this is like a classic capitalism good argument. Companies outsource work quite often, specifically for developing regions. So, some spec knowledge is quite crazy to know here. A lot of Filipinos in college, like a lot of Filipinos in college who are trying to make a side hustle, often teach English to foreign like students. So you will have a Vietnamese company who will employ a lot of Filipino teachers and hire them to teach English to Vietnamese kids in their company. That is just one example out of many different examples. My brother works for a Singaporean company as an analyst, and most of the time, he doesn't even go to the Singaporean headquarters. He just works at home and does a bunch of like data analysis on his computer and attends meetings. Companies often outsource work, which like they'll pay someone else to do the work for them because it's just become easy to diversify how you could get your services. A personal example that I'm going to use here is that back when I was a music producer, so I didn't sing music, I created music, I created the instrumentals, etc., and things like that. I would often get outsourced work where you have a lot of companies who needed to create music, not like music, like creative expressions of music. It was often the background music of like, maybe it was corporate videos and they needed some background music that they had to copyright, or some extension. Maybe it was like a label who wanted some instrumentals for whoever they were making, would hire me to create that music. And I wasn't even working for that company. I was working, setting up myself, marketing my advertisers, and they would come to me and be like, hey, could you make this for us? And I would make them. That is just one example out of millions. And some of you probably do it too. Some of you probably have side hustles where you work online. And maybe this is a word of advice as well, aside from, like, I'm just taking this out of the debating context. Aside from debating, aside from being able to monetize debating like how I do, you can monetize a whole lot of things online. Like I know I sound like an internet guru right now, but it is a unlimited world where your opportunities are only restricted by what you cannot do. But once you learn how to do something and you're able to put yourself out there, I guarantee you can monetize a lot of things. And I've sort of taken advantage of this as a person myself. I created seasons because I wanted to organize tournaments. I created serious IV and humor IV because I wanted to um, organize tournaments that were funny and cool and things like that. And I can sell my services and coaching. And there's just so many other opportunities aside from coaching, right? But yeah, a little bit of a rant a bit of a yap there, but I think it's quite important to learn in terms of the fact that your ability to create is your ability to not only create but also sell your creation, and that ability for even the most vulnerable of people, the people who are even the most poorest in rural regions, were able to do this. And by extension, this has a lot of impacts that you can run in debating. Things like social movements, right? It's very easy for influencers who come from minority backgrounds to show themselves to be popular and speak out in their opinions and things like that. It's very easy for minorities to have platforms where they're able to express themselves, express their form of art form, and share their culture to other people, share their culture and commercialize it in a way which was beneficial to them, which gave them money, which gave communities money. And also the rise of the gig economy meant and things like freelance work, things like remittances, where you could work for a Singaporean company, send a Singaporean salary back to your family, and it would just be a big paycheck and things like that. And all of these things, being able to sell services, are quite big impacts of expression, but also big impacts of being able to help people. And this is something that's quite crucial for everyone to learn. Of course, with all those benefits, there are going to be harms. And the biggest harm when it comes to digital platforms is the most obvious harm, which is misinformation. And misinformation has a lot of layers of harms. So, the nature of algorithms in most platforms generally means two things. The first is that you're often shown things that the algorithm determines are good for you, or things that they think that you will engage with more. And of course, because of that, a lot of this content is often sensationalized and clickbaity due to the algorithm wanting to avoid a lot of kinds of content that are inherently going to be like that. What has this meant? Personally, it is just the fact that it's just hard to regulate. And here's the problem about any regulation argument when it comes to social media. It is well nigh impossible to some degree unless you have some form of motion that literally bans the entirety of social media. And the reason for that is quite simple. Algorithms by nature have to prioritize sensationalized content. That's literally how they're created. But also, you also have corporate influence, you also have political influence. They don't want to take down these platforms. They don't want to take down the nature of wanting to spread this because it just makes them. And something that's important is that it's not just the fact that it makes, I think that a lot of people miss out here, is that the reason that social media platforms create very, very predatory algorithms and like selling your data is not just because of money, but it's because of the fact that it allows them to set agendas. It allows them to set political agendas that are often influenced by whoever is their friends in high places. So, and another thing that's hard is that the fact that by nature of prioritizing sensationalized content and by nature of the democratization of production, that is to say, anyone can edit a video, anyone can edit a video in a good way, it's very easy to have high quality produced content made by really bad people who say really bad things, but their claims make sense because they come from a position of authority. Case in point, Andrew Tate. Case in point, Jordan Peterson. Case in point, to some degree, um, any right wing podcast person you know has done this. But maybe to some degree, it's not just right wing, right? It's often radical content that can shield itself by making it look professional. Sometimes it's even often people in the far left who are arguing very crazy communist things and like very like I'm not a commie. I just said like very crazy communist things, but maybe it could be something as very hard as just like telling you that everything you've thought about life is wrong. You should believe my religious rhetoric that is telling you you should cast out everyone and you should probably stone the people who is in your religion. That is an extreme example. But the crazy thing is that those extreme examples become far higher of a quantity that happens because of the fact that the algorithm doesn't just promote this, it kind of allows it to exist. And I know everyone can say, but you can report the content. The problem is that reporting content is often not always easy to do because it's like the algorithm and the way that reporting works requires a huge amount of reporting for that content to be taken down. So some bad apples are taken down. Cancel culture could exist to take down certain content. The issue is that cancel culture cannot take down everything. That is why, even in social media spaces, if you just go online, you will often see someone doing something stupid or someone posting something really bad and stupid. But why do these content places stay? Confirmation bias and the danger of influence. The problem right now is that a lot of things end up being subjective. I'm not saying that everything is subjective. There are obviously some objective truths. There are obviously some things which are clearly awful that cannot be rebutted. Yet, it's very, you will often see spaces of people defending them. Case in point, Trump. Maybe some people agree with a degree of Trump policy. Sorry about that. But more more pertinently right now in the SAT school, what that guy is doing is pretty bad. Like, he's doing a lot of terrible policies. He's doing a lot of things which are basically dictatorships. Yet everyone is supporting him. And why is that? Because the fact that polarization is just a norm now. And when polarization is a norm, everything becomes subjective because everyone is going to die and fight for their opinion and post and die and fight for their opinion. And I think another analogy I'll use here is the fact that in Facebook, I will still get a random post that will have like 10,000 likes about, hey, Drake won the Kendrick Lamar beef. And I would just be there like, the fuck you mean? I don't think that was even a win for Drake. If someone here is a Drake fan and thinks Drake won the beef, sure, I guess that's your opinion, but I don't think so. And maybe that's a subjective example, right? But this applies to a whole host of other things, like the norm and rise of conservative beliefs, the norm and rise of conservative radicalism and attacking other people, but also the way this influences the average Joe. It's very, very easy for average people to just see these spaces and listen to these spaces and be exposed to these spaces and be conditioned to believe that it is inherently something they ought to believe in, something that is ought to be good for them. That's often something that's quite bad and something that you really cannot control as a result of that. So that's something to keep in mind. Misinformation debates, debates about media and misinformation. This is sort of how you mechanize it, right? It's very hard to control this because people generally believe they're right. And people see content that they think is right and they act out on that content. They call other people stupid, they call other bad. But also, it's the fact that this normalizes, there's just a lack of empathy that is normalized. Discourse as an impact, I really hate it when people run discourse and say discourse as a nature is a good thing. No! The problem with discourse is a very debater land impact. Yes, you can say discourse and think it's good, but the problem is that the reality of discourse is that it's hostile and performative. It is really not going to be that great, etc. and things like that, right? So by nature of this, right, you really cannot just say discourse is good. You have to mechanize what the platforms of discourse is often good. So this is how you rebut discourse impacts, by the way. You will just say, no, discourse cannot be just said as an impact and be good. A lot of times discourse is quite harmful. Most times discourse is harmful. Most times it's very performative in nature. It's very fiery in nature. It often doesn't lead to anything. And the rise of discourse means the rise of anti-discourse. So you'll have a lot of people shitting on the discourse and saying it's bad and something we shouldn't support. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize, that discourse impacts are not that easy to win on. You actually have to prove why that discourse is good. A lot of times, in my view, a lot of discourse can be bad. Okay, consumption philosophies in media. What do I mean by this? This is going to kind of integrate a bit of art and the expression of art and how this influences people. The nature of media is that it influences people in a massive number of ways that I think a lot of you guys should try and be note of. Firstly is in the way of how it shapes identities and characters. Intuition pump. If you are a K-pop fan, you become a K-pop person. You enthrall yourself with the identity of K-pop. Why is this the case? Because media immersion and the way, like watching, listening, understanding creators, understanding art, media art, created an environment where people became enthralled with art form, that it started shaping their identities, it started shaping their personalities. How does it shape people's perceptions? It shapes your personality. For example, you will watch Peaky Blinders and you'll start speaking in a British accent. You'll watch X content, you'll start behaving in X content. Whoever you like, whoever becomes your celebrity of choice, whoever becomes your role model, you start becoming like them, incidentally, because of this media. It also affects how you spend your day. The kind of communities you join, the kind of time you spend your day, the kind of people you connect with, often get influenced by the media you are influenced by or the media you watch. But also it's the values that you have. Because media, and something people forget about media, is that it teaches you direct and subliminal messages. The more you watch, the more you absorb the value of that. So, for example, the kind of messaging you get from music like Kendrick Lamar makes you far more aware of social issues regarding Black Americans, and more often than not, the kind of music that people can create, the compellingness of it, often influence what you think about life. So, I would say that as a person who watches like a lot of content on YouTube, I watch a lot of educational stuff. That definitely influences me in some capacity, and it sort of shapes my degree to make decisions and things like that. And sometimes, even if you don't pay attention to social issues, or you just want to listen to good shit, sometimes the appreciation of good shit is something which drives you to understand it more in some capacity, especially if it's complex, especially if it's high quality. Then you have the process of regurgitation, where it's very common for even the average consumer to start becoming disseminators of creators and end up becoming creators themselves. So it can be something simple. Sometimes talking to your friend about a song, singing a song, making an edit on a song, making an edit on a celebrity, writing an essay on it in your school. That process, even if it's casual, is something that's important because it's a process of dissemination and regurgitating by some degree, which engages you more with that content and makes you understand that media more. So, for example, if you end up picking like I don't know, doing an essay on the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, you start understanding what that movie meant and how it means to you, and by extension, it makes you more immersed and engage that music a lot more. But also, the kind of regurgitation that happens is often major. Big reviewers and opinion leaders and even other producers who use their influence to promote forms of media to other people. And it can often be the taking of media and reformulating it to create something new based on that media. That's the whole concept of remixes, for example. Remixes and from music, but also sequels and remakes and reboots that the film industry is so obsessed with right now. That is part of the concept of regurgitation. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's good because existing IP is often very nice to engage with. That's why you often have a lot of debates about, hey, do we make a sequel? Do we make a new thing? The reason you defend sequels, the easiest way to defend sequels is just to say that people like the existing IP. But also, it is just easier to create it. It's just more profit and just more profit possibility margin. Even if it flops, most people are still gonna go because dumb kids want to see um Lion King in like three in like a live person, etc. Right? But also, to some degree, maybe it is harmful because in terms of the creativity and the lack of it, right? So that's something that you want to keep in mind of in terms of the fact that like content as a content and IP like Mickey Mouse and let's say for example Call of Duty and the Modern Warfare reboot. A more obvious example is things like Marvel and the obsession with creating sequels and random spin-offs. That by itself is part of the regurgitation process of media. And more often, whenever you get debates about creating X over Y, creating this or
The
that,
rules
etc.,
clean are no dirt.
someone Wendy, you're muted. I'm gonna mute you. So when it comes to like the modification and creation, right? That's something you'll often see a lot in media debates where it's about this new thing or this old thing. And I think the competition here is that new thing is often hard to kind of think of because a lot of ideas have been taken already, and to some degree, when you create something, it is often already a reflection of other things. And this is another thing about the regurgitation process. Whenever you create something, you're ultimately going to be influenced by a huge degree of other things. Intuition pump, my speech style could be influenced from other people's speech styles. So I could be speaking like Matt Toomey with a bit of Hunter Goldberg, but then I could also integrate some bits of David Africa. And maybe to some extent, if I'm feeling like it and I'm speaking seconds, I take a bit of Taha Masud with me. I take a bit of let's think of I take a bit of Alec. Maybe if I'm doing first and I want to be robotic, I want to speak like Grumman. And then often I even though I'm not stealing their styles, I am molding my own creation. I am molding my own style by the inspiration I get from other things. And that is often something you will see when you talk about the creation of media, the creation of movies. Unfortunately, nothing is ever original. Unfortunately, you something that you create has often already been done in some capacity, i.e., the same fucking chord progression in every single pop song. Um, it's C, G, A minor, F, it's something that will be used in every single music ever, and some variation of chord progression has been used in every single piece. So that's something also important to keep in mind. You're often inspired from a whole host of other media to create your own media, and that is something that probably shapes things like creation debates, how you can mech out why people create things and how they're able to create things in an easy way, etc. Things like that. Oh shit. Um, the final thing I just want to talk about here is the nature of trends that naturally happen out of the regurgitation process. Trends are created because digital media allow a platform where people can just engage in things that they like, they talk about it more, they repost it more, then there's just an exponential cycle of everyone reposts it, boom, trend created. And they're often helped with algorithms and people's perception of that. And something to keep in mind, trends are not often always objectively good to hear. Maybe they are just catchy. Maybe they just have a nice hook, or maybe they just are so stupid that they are trends. Tide Pod trend, where people thought it was a good idea to eat Tide Pods, which please don't do that. Right. All media forms are art in some capacity, as I explained before. As I say, you're often inspired by many different art forms to create art, but stories are often reflective of personal experience. Sometimes, when it comes to stories, and this is going to be present in debates where this house believes that you should make X media over Y media, X tone over Y tone, you have to make trade offs in terms of the tone you are making that media form. So, you cannot make a happy story. Unfortunately, you can't make a happy story without sacrificing the sad, pessimistic parts. If you do include the sad, pessimistic parts while still trying to make it happy, you will still include the sad, pessimistic parts, but it will not be a happy story. And then there's often like tones that you'll often see in media art forms that dominate that tone. And that's something you have to keep in mind. You cannot make a happy or a sad one. And of course, this influences people in a big capacity. If you make something quite happy and optimistic, people like it, people see it, and people feel hope. People think that there's going to be good things out of it. But then there's also the harm of maybe it is too optimistic. Maybe if it's going to influence people in terms of the smokescreen effect of there is some hope, but maybe if you just forget the bad things, everything will be okay. The sad part also you flip everything, right? You become far more painfully aware of what needs to be done in society. Maybe you create change, but again, is discourse perfect? Maybe you create discourse out of sad, pessimistic art, but the nature of that discourse still has to be good. But what if it makes people too pessimistic? What if it makes people think that there's no hope? Maybe you need some degree of happiness. All of these trade-offs have to be made, and you often debate about this quite heftily. Um, Something that's also important to mind is the nature of profit maximizing. The pros and the benefits people say when it comes to characterizing media creation is like, obviously you want to profit maximize, so it has to be produced good. But sometimes big studios will sidestep the creation of creativity because they just can create something and it will be lazy, but it will make it. Sometimes you have the wokeness of content. So if you notice right now in the movie industry, there's been an incredible rise of trying to get diversity, trying to get like more female representation, the rise of like girl boss actresses in a lot of action movies specifically. And that has its own set of pros and cons. The obvious benefit is just diversity and being able to have women represented in a industry where historically they were mostly objectified and seen as just toys. Marilyn Monroe is obviously the biggest example here, but even that objectification has affected a lot of women pre 2000s. Now you have an industry which is actively popularizing, trying to set women and like uh, sexual minorities. I'm not sure if that's the term. I'm so sorry. Like you have a lot of like people who are showing like LGBTQ stories. You have a lot of things like BoJack Horseman showing asexuality as a big plot point, and just normalizing these kinds of characters, normalizing these kinds of discussions within these movies. But then you also have the flip side of it, which is that you have the commercialization of this, and commercialization inherently has some bad traits, i.e., people get tired of it. Sometimes people just get tired of seeing the 10th girl boss in a row. Some people don't and get inspired from it, and that's good. But some people don't, and then you have the rise of conservative backlash that says, why the fuck am I. Of course, there's also another harm, which is that because of the nature of like rainbow capitalism and just trying to commercialize the girl boss movement and feminism in movies, you often have a lot of like shifting of IPs where gender swaps happen. Gender swaps, by nature, at least in my opinion, aren't necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it is. I don't think it's that deep if you change someone like the Human Torch into a girl. But a lot of people who are original fans of the original IP have big complaints about that. They have very big complaints. They'll voice out their opinions, and sometimes it's misogynistic. Sometimes it is worded in a way which like has a valid concern, but then people call it misogynistic. So then again, the whole it all boils down to the fact that sometimes the nature of this causes discourse, which is bad or good, and companies want to profit maximize, so they will shape things in a way which could be good, could be bad. The way you kind of debate that is just to figure out how is it perceived, what is the majority perception, and what good can it really do. Even if people complain about the wokeness of content and seeing too much girl bosses, you can't deny that it has created far more representation and create far more representation and expression for people who historically were not able to express themselves in that medium to express themselves finally. Like, sure, maybe it is not the greatest idea to set a inexperienced director to direct a really big film, but the fact that they got that opportunity to begin with is something we should be proud of, and it sets the precedence for other people who are not able to bring themselves up in that capacity. So yeah, commercialization, it's good, allows people to come in and create, gives opportunities, but it can also be bad because people may not like it. Yeah, in terms of media forms and how it impacts social messaging, very, very big part of media debates is the fact that how it integrates a social movement debates. Because social movements biggest point of advocacy that a lot of people do not realize and kind of forget to impact and make out heavily is digital media, social media pages, and the kind of advocacy that you do, the kind of messaging that you do, even being able to call out stories. Cancel culture, by extension of social media, is from social movements. Shaming other people is from social movements and is done from social media. Very, very big part. But also the dissemination of content and how people, specifically social medias, take content and use that within their advocacy. So, for example, Black Lives Matter, black activists will often highlight a series of movies that talk about like prejudiced racism against black communities in America and use it as advocacy. Like, look at this movie, guys. It was telling the story. Is very, very important for you to understand. Historical documentaries, which are often part of media to some capacity, etc. And these are quite important for social movements because these are very immersive. Like, for example, these are very immersive. They generally affect people's values. They generally talk about people's lives. This minority should make X media over Y media. Video games, etc., can influence people to some capacity. All of this is just how you impact art, how you impact people's influence in media. The way you see things, the way you view things is something that's very, very important, etc., and things like that. And then you have, of course, the extent of marketing strategies and the dissemination of content. I'm not going to focus way too much on this, but this is something I think should be quite clear, is how companies market now. So dissemination of content, the marketing strategies you talk about, the marketing strategies, and even the kinds of monetization strategies are quite interesting. So we went from a rise of just upfront payment to the rise of subscription content, which is a way of just kind of monetizing the content. It's like streaming, etc. But also the kinds of ways you market is quite very, very different now. You have celebrity marketing, you have influencer marketing, you have guerrilla marketing, and all of these marketing appealing to authorities, basic marketing strategies, and branding, etc. often create the impression of why certain content matters more than other. How do you use this? Again, commercialization. The more money you have as a company, the more you're able to speak and the more you're able to push a certain agenda, to push a certain message. Maybe sometimes different companies will not be, or different minorities are not able to do this in bad ways. So you create the competition argument there when it comes to media as a whole, right? So promoting X movie out of Y movie when you're this. On the nature of perceiving and consuming content, um, I think the TLDR here is that people react and content to content and disseminate content differently based on their personality. Probably the average viewer does not understand why everything everywhere all at once, but people like me who love media and understand storytelling in its core probably care a lot about it and really, 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 really get affected by it in a good way. All right. Then role models. This one I also won't really focus on much. Role models, media, you often get the easy capacity for find some degree of role models from media. Um, I being able to idolize many debaters and become part of them, being able to idolize a musician and wanted to become that musician, being able to, unfortunately, maybe possibly idolize political people. Maybe if it's bad political belief, that's pretty bad. But sometimes there is someone who is an activist who constantly shapes out your opinion that you can become a role model. And I also want to point out here that anyone can be a role model. Um, some degree, even the average Joe, like you and I, can be a role model in some way. We just don't realize because we're able to show ourselves outside. But also in terms of the philosophies that you live in life, that definitely gets shaped by who your role model is, who you like, who you don't like, the traits you love, you hate. The TLDR of all of this is media is very influential in developing your character. Media influences you in a lot of ways. There are often a lot of nuances here. You kind of have to weigh between them and frame this. A lot of harms. Harms going to be quite clear. The oversaturation and overflow of content. I think this is kind of not something that people are aware of, but something you guys will be aware of now. Uh, Algorithms have very specific standards on what blows up when it comes to creating media. So you have the limitation of creativity, i.e., the TikTokification, which prioritizes pop hooks as opposed to more experimental music genres. So you often have indie artists who are forced to opt into these trends. Competition is often quite stiff, especially in TikTok. So it is accessible. It is still easy to set yourself out, but it's not easy to succeed. Not all musicians are guaranteed success. Some are stuck at the 100 viewers mark, like me. That's why I never became a musician in the future. Sometimes this happens even if you're talented. You really need to grind to be seen, and because of the fact that it's not the most easiest to monetize unless you have a base, it's not the most helpful. Even when you're seen and popular, popularity is often cyclical. You have trends which fall you out of favor, will fall you out of favor. You have to work hard to make yourself feel relevant. Sometimes, even when you're popular, you just got lucky. And okay, I'm not trying to talk down on the good artists who exist right now, who are very popular deservedly, who are like they don't. It's not. I'm not saying that they don't deserve. I love Luffy. I love like I love Sabrina Carpenter, who were able to rise because of things. I love Billie Eilish. But trust me, guys, there are a lot of people who are probably as talented as them who just never got that ability to compete. And that's also another counter argument to the whole accessibility point of like, yeah, content exists, but trying to succeed there is another question. Another thing to point out is that being a digital celebrity and influencer isn't always good. Cyberbullying, a classic harm that you will always run. Being a hater is normalized, unfortunately. It's kind of sad. There's an inherent lack of empathy because there's just lack of face-to-face communication, which means it's far more easier to become a hater. But also, the rise of things like the lack of regulation of content, the lack of being able to confirm and validate certain content means that it's very, very easy for someone to just kind of create a fake set of receipts and cancel you. And very, very hard to kind of disseminate which is true, which is false. So you have a lot of like bickering and a lot of like attempt to cancel each other, which is kind of sad. Uh, this is the last slide. Finally, you have the rise of things like fake content, AI content, and just bad content in general. Mobile game ads. A lot of mobile games right now suck, let's be real. Even if the fact that they're free and have 5,000 advertisements and they're actually advertising the wrong game, it sucks. A lot of YouTube sponsorships are bad. Like, BetterHelp sucks. It's just a bad company. The honey scam is crazy. And now you have the rise of AI apps, which are just scams. Like, in Facebook, I can't believe I'm saying this. I was seeing an ad of an AI app which could literally deepfake a video of you and anyone kissing. I can't believe people are creating shit like this, but it's crazy. And this is also an argument, a common argument against the democratization of content and the democratization of services. Um, just because everyone can create content doesn't mean it's always a good thing. Because you mean you can create bad content, you can create bad services, but most importantly, you can create scummy services. And it's hard to verify the legitimacy of that content sometimes, because even reviews and bots can fake the legitimacy of this. Like, have you ever gone to a YouTube channel and you've seen like a finance video and you just had this weird comment stream of just like a bunch of bots talking trying to advertise some random person's services? It's very clearly scam, but it's very easy to fall into if you're not educated enough. And all of this boils down to just very predatory advertising that, of course, a lot of corporations don't give a shit about. They will do it, and all of this is due to the fault of media platforms. And of course, it's predatory in the nature where they will sell your data and influence kids towards bad things. And like, that's kind of bad, right? Sometimes, even if you're educated, it's often not enough. Content is not safe, and people are not educated. So you can often fall victim to all of these harms. That's something that's pretty bad. So, oh shit, okay, yeah, that's something different entirely. Overall, that's the end of this workshop. Um, so basically speaking, the whole TLDR of everything that we've learned here is just that media, quite a big deal, has a lot of influence, shapes your personality, shapes who you are as a person. That's quite something that you should probably absorb. Secondly, media is very commercialization of media and the ability for the average Joe to use media in some form to set themselves out there, create creative expressions, and have discourse on those creative expressions, and even monetize your creative expressions is something that's also quite important. So being able to benefit from just this education and online resources and things like that. But this can also be bad because you can create bad content, and sometimes people can shit on you, and sometimes bad people can create bad people can like make discourse in a bad way and things like that, and that's something that's pretty harmful, pretty bad. There's also misinformation. There's also the fact that the nature of algorithms, etc., might be quite harmful, etc. So all of the debates about media is just sort of weighing the trade-offs, weighing all these things, and just trying to figure out what is the pros and cons. We'll take 5 minutes for Q&A. Otherwise, I'm just going to immediately release the spar. As we allow the Q&A session, I'm also just going to do the roll call for the debaters of the spar. So, yeah, let me just find the DS4 workshop so that I can do the yeah. But in the meantime, you guys can ask questions in the chat. No, Rubaiyat, I'm not singing. For the love of God, for the last time, I create music. I do not sing music. Um, okay. Is Kashaf and Samin here?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
we're here.
Cool.
Been here since the start.
Okay, cool, cool. Abdul, I'm not singing. Yeah, I'm not singing. I refuse to sing. I'm not a singer. Ibrahim and Fatim, are you guys here? Ooh, yellow journalism. Oh yeah, yellow journalism. So, uh, Eurojournalism is not something which I have like heard of quite heavily in terms of the nature of it, but I think a part of it is something that is quite relevant in terms of how news and the nature of things like citizen journalism, it's basically still a big deal in journalism nowadays. So, what is yellow journalism? It's basically sexy headline, exaggerate story, make sale. And yellow journalism to this day and age is still something which is very popular because the way that news platforms work, even with the rise of citizen journalism being able to call out like BBC or the Fox for creating this really biased and intentionally sensationalized media content, it's just the fact that um you just want to make money, right? And as journalists, you need to be able to create a profit for your company. Or even as a citizen journalist, you want to be able to make sure your story stays viral. So this extends towards, again, the creation of bad content and how political influence and the nature of monetizing echo chambers, which is a real thing. People often try to monetize echo chambers by creating the most screwed up, fucked up headlines to intentionally piss off other people and have very angry comment sections. Another thing about yellow journalism that has happened nowadays is the fact that misinformation and yellow journalism can often go hand in hand because there has just been a lack of need to verify whether or not stories are true. So, and this often creates a culture of polarization and a culture of, again, what is true and what isn't. That's something that's very crazy to think about, that we just don't know what is true nowadays because any headline could shape the way that people think, and we just do not know if it's talking about objective truth. I mean, it is just the nature of news, right? It's going to be biased in some degree. But let's just say, for example, we our only and I'm not going to make a controversial claim here, but I'm going to make a claim that I think is very important to think about. Our perception on humanitarian conflicts and just broadly terrible things in society right now, things like the Sudan conflict, things like the Israel Palestine conflict, things like the Uyghur genocide, things like the Rohingya genocide, are massively shaped based on what we read, based on what we see. And who we read from definitely influences what we think about that issue. And that often it is often shaped on where you come from as well. So, for example, a conservative North American person, I'm not going to point fingers because I don't know anyone who is falling under that umbrella, but the average like redneck or the average person probably watches a lot of right wing content and by extension supports Trump and by extension supports Israel. Is their view right? Inherently, probably not. But let's just say if we compare it to our view, obviously we have far more ability to see what is going on in the ground. We can see bombings, we can see people dying, we can see statistics. But the impression of that can only go so far in terms of the fact that it can truly be contested by anyone, and then it just kind of goes into a cycle of what is true and what isn't. So that's also another thing to point out about media, right? It's like very, very hard to kind of be able to kind of disseminate what's true and what's not. Yeah. So I think that's what I want to chat about Eurojournalism. But a whole of it can relate to the stuff I saw. Okay. So is OO here? I think I saw Ibrahim Kazi come and then Ibrahim Kazi left. So like, I is Fatim Bilal here? I'm not sure if they like mentioned they're here just now.
Cool. Whilst we wait for a quick question, I know you probably mentioned this in the role model session. I was half-heartedly listening in. It's 1 a.m. How exactly does, for example, having a Black Little Mermaid or having a gay protagonist that or gay side character that ultimately end up dying for the protagonist who is a cishet white man, anyways, actually help children from those backgrounds? Because oftentimes we assert that seeing those people within the TV or the film makes us feel better as someone from that background or minority. How do you meaningfully prove that it actually makes us feel better, given like every actor responds differently in media debates about role modeling or blackwashing or rainbow washing?
So if we're talking about the context of the black or like LGBTQ side character dying for the cis white man, more often than not, that kind of interpretation is very easy to prove that it leads to bad things because the automatic assumption of it is the fact that the average viewer will be like, that was just there for diversity quota. Why would you do that? I think in terms of trying to take the hard line and proving why even the side characters who are probably Like, let's just say in the absolute worst case scenario, the directors were just like, we are throwing this character in and making them black because we want money and we want to cater towards the black audience and do some degree. So I think the first is just that a lot of this depends on the characterization of how you have to be specific in the kinds of portrayal that is making for you to be able to disseminate some form of impact that can work. So, for example, if you want some degree of inspiration, then it has to be a form of arguing why the presence is not just the presence, but what that character has done in that movie, how that character, yeah, how that character, like, how that character, what that character represents as a role model. So, a black kid in Harry Potter, and its own in a vacuum, may not sound good, but a black kid in Harry Potter, which is a big deal. I think it's one thing. It's the fact that they were in an IP or in a form of media that historically never was able to get that form of representation. So I think you argue in terms of, like, back then, this was just never done. New presidents being created, it's such a big deal. And I think the second way you want to try and impact it is in terms of the way that these stakeholders feel. How do you visualize being an average person watching someone from your demographic up there and be shine like that? I think the first way it kind of happens is just the fact that the more easiest way to impact this is just to say that it inspires people to kind of be better, to realize that in a world where historically they never got opportunities to begin with in some capacity, now they were able to access those opportunities because other people are being accessed those opportunities. So it's a mech of motivation. But secondly, another thing that to be pointed out here is the fact that by extension of that diversity being there implies the addition of 4 more diversity quotas to being made. So analogy, probably back then there really wasn't any diversity quota for worlds or majors. Maybe it's just European. Maybe you just have white people in the panel and that's good. Now we just have a general big demand, even for majors, even for normal tournaments, to try and include diversity as a quota. One addition sparks additional additions because the nature of corporations needing to commercialize on diversity means that more corporations do it. I think the third way that you're able to do it is just the fact that giving them a platform outside of just the movie, but also the way that they are able to do engage in interviews and things like that, etc. Yeah. So I was waiting for OO's partner to come. I'm not sure if OO's partner is here. I know CG is here. I'm not sure if CO is here. So Raghav and Siddharth.
Yeah, we're here, we're here. We have joined from the same device. That is
Okay,
Raghav.
cool. I'll answer one more question and I'm going to release the motion. I want to release it 12, 15 strict. Arguments for and subscription of ad and social media. Okay, I only have, this is a big dense question. I'm going to answer it in the Zoom chat. I hope, speak and spark. I don't know who you are. I hope you're not speaking. I really want to release the motion right now. Cool. So right now is 12:15 o'clock. Obviously the motion is going to be related to media. Just give me a second. I'm going to make breakout rooms. I should also probably stop the recording. Sorry, my bad.